Hello students, welcome back to your history class. I am Mrs. Jenny Shah and we are now moving forward to our ninth chapter, Industrial Revolution. This is the last theme for this year. Basically, this theme explores the movement of world towards modernization. Up till now, in the previous chapters, we have learned about the crucial developments of the medieval and the early modern world. We learned about the feudalism, the European Renaissance, and the encounters between Europeans and the people of Americas. Now, you all must have realized that some phenomena you all must have come across or you all must have deduced some phenomena that have contributed to the making of a modern world gradually evolved into this period. And especially from the mid 15th century, you must have observed some changes that have led to modernization. Two further developments in the world history has created a context of what is now termed as modernization. These two things are number one is the Industrial Revolution, and the next is a series of political revolutions. These two transformed subjects into citizens. Right from American Revolution, French Revolution, Industrial Revolution has also paved its way towards modernization. Now, Britain was the first industrial nation you will read about. For long, it was believed that British industrialization provided the model for industrialization in the other country. In Theme 9, we will discuss how historians have begun to question some of the earlier ideas about the industrial revolution. Each country has drawn upon the experience of other nations and not necessarily reproduced any particular model. In Britain, coal and cotton textile industries were developed in the first phase of industrialization, while invention of railways initiated the second stage of that process. In other countries like Russia, industrialization happened much later, from the late 19th century. Railways and other heavy industries emerged in their initial phases of industrialization. Similarly, role of state, of banks in industrialization has differed from country to country. The treatment of the British case will hopefully whet our curiosity about the industrial trajectories of other nations such as USA and Germany, which were two significant industrial powers. This theme will also emphasize the human and material cost incurred by Britain on its industrialization, the plight of the laboring poor, especially of children, environmental degradation, and consequent epidemics of cholera and tuberculosis. In the further chapters, we will also read about industrial pollution and cadmium and mercury poisoning in Japan that has stirred people into mass movements against indiscriminate industrialization. European powers began to colonize parts of America and Asia and South Africa well before industrialization. 10th theme will tell us about the story of what European settlers did to the native people of America and Australia. The bourgeois mentality of the settlers made them buy and sell everything, including land and water. But the natives, who appeared uncivilized to European Americans, asked, If you do not own the freshness of the air and the sparkle of the water, how can one buy them? The natives did not feel the need to own the land, fish, or animals. They had no desire to commodify them. If things needed to be exchanged, they could simply be gifted. Quite obviously, the natives and the Europeans represented competing notions of civilization. While the natives did not allow Europeans to wipe out their cultures, the US and the Canadian governments of the mid 20th centuries desired the natives to join the mainstream, and the Australian authorities of the same period attempted to simply ignore their traditions and cultures. In such scenarios, one may wonder, what do you mean by mainstream? How does economic and political power influence the making of mainstream cultures? Next came Western capitalism, mercantile, industrial, and financial. The early 20th century Japanese capitalism created colonies in large parts of the Third World. Some of these were settler colonies. Others, such as British rule in India, are examples of direct imperial control. The case of 19th and early 20th century China illustrates a third variant of imperialism. Britain, France, Germany, Russia, America, and Japan meddled in the Chinese affairs without directly taking over state power. They exploited the country's resources to their own advantage, seriously compromising Chinese sovereignty and reducing the country to the status of semi-colony. Almost everywhere, colonial exploitation was challenged by powerful nationalist movements. Nationalism arose without a colonial context. All nationalisms are doctrines of popular sovereignty. Nationalist movements believe that political power should rest with the people, and this is what makes nationalism a modern concept. Civic nationalism vests sovereignty in all people, regardless of language, ethnicity, religion, or gender. It seeks to create a community of rights, exercising citizens, and defines nationhood in terms of citizenship, not ethically or religion. Ethnic and religious nationalism try to build nation solidarities around a given language, religion, or a set of traditions, defining the people ethically, not in terms of a common citizenship. In a multi ethnic country, ethnic nationalities limit the exercise of sovereignty to a chosen few, often assumed to be superior to minority communities. Today, most of the Western countries define their nationhood in terms of common citizenship and not by common ethnicity. One prominent exemption is Germany, where ideas of ethnic nationalism have had a strong and troubling career going back to the reaction against the French imperial occupation of German states in 1806. Ideologies of civic nationalism have vied with those of ethnic religious nationalism the world over, and this has been so in the modern India, China, and Japan as well. About industrialization, which paves the path to modernization, different societies have evolved their distinctive modernity. The Japanese and the Chinese cases are very instructive in this regard. Japan succeeded in remaining free of colonial control and achieved fairly rapid economic and industrial progress throughout the 20th century. The rebuilding of the Japanese economy after a humiliating defeat in the Second World War should not be seen as a mere post war miracle. Theme Chapter 11 will show us that it resulted from certain gains that has already been accomplished in the 19th and the 20th century. For example, by 1910, tuition fees for studying at a primary school had more or less ended, and enrollment had now become universal. Japan's path to modernization has had its own tensions, those between the democracy and militarism, ethnic nationalism and civic nation building, and between what many may say Japanese especially describe as tradition and westernization. The Chinese had resisted the colonial exploitation, and their own bureaucratic landed alike through a combination of peasant rebellion, reform, and revolution. By early 1930s, the Chinese Communist Party, which drew its strength from peasant mobilization, had begun confronting the imperial powers as well as the nationalists who represented the country's elite. It had also started implementing its ideas in selected pockets of the country. Its egalitarian ideology, stress on land reforms, and awareness of women's problems helped it overthrow foreign imperialism and nationalists in 1949. Once it was in power, it succeeded in reducing inequalities, spreading education, and creating political awareness. Even so, the country's single-party framework and state repression repression contributed to considerable dissatisfaction with the political system after the mid-1960s. But the Chinese Communist Party had been able to regain control over the country, largely because, in embracing certain market principles, it reinvented itself and had worked hard to transform China into an economic powerhouse. The different ways in which different countries have understood modernity and sought to achieve it, each in their own context, in their own circumstances and ideas, make a very fascinating story. So, this is the last theme of this year, and I'm looking forward to exploring it with you all. So, this was setting base to the last leg of history for this year. With this, I'm ending today's class. Stay home, stay safe, take care, keep learning.